Hello and welcome to another episode of Transformational Blueprints, where we try to put a dent in the large number of transformation programs that fail. Hosted by me, Mario Michaels, founder and director of Synaxia Group. On this series, we will bring you unique insights drawn from first-hand experience from some of the most high-profile architecture and transformation leaders across the globe. Topics told in order to share knowledge, experiences and ideas to inspire, innovate and give back to the architecture community. So grab a coffee, sit back and relax. Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking to James Cole about the reasons he believes failure of transformation programs. With over 2 decades in IT, with 16 years of those in architecture and half of those in leadership roles, James has worked across a range of industries and software vendors, consultancies, and end customer organization. His experience in building architecture and engineering teams and driving digital transformation change. Welcome, James.
Morning, Mario. How you doing?
Not too bad, as good as it can get. As good as it can get. So we always like to sort of start with a bit of background about yourself. Tell us about your background.
Yeah, sure. I guess, like, as you sort of said in the bio there, I've moved around quite a bit. Been lucky enough to work in and sort of wear a number of different hats over the years. I've worked in the UK, Europe, Africa, Australasia. So a good chance to meet lots of different people, work in different industries, take different viewpoints, etc. So I've had a good range of experiences, I guess, to date. And over the course of that journey, I've kind of moved from a position of, starting out as a developer, and then moving through into design to architecture, and then architecture into building architecture teams, and then picking up more recently engineering and more strategy work. So it's been an interesting journey so far. Yeah, good fun.
Okay, good. And for context then, tell us about your remit at Kaplan as the head of architecture and engineering then.
Yeah, that's right. So as you said, there's a combination of architecture and engineering, which is an interesting place to play. So I sort of taken a path over recent years that have sort of seen me building out architecture teams. And then when the Kaplan opportunity arose, it was a chance to sort of to step back, if you want to step more into, I suppose, the engineering side and delivery side of things. So one of the things that had bothered me, where I'd sort of been in large scale change programs, large enterprises, was I was starting to feel maybe I drifted a little bit away from the nuts and bolts of development, testing, modern ways of working. So to come into Kaplan and pick up engineering was a good opportunity for me. And it was a really good chance to hire some good tech leads, work with a team on sort of microservice type problems, or microservice problems amongst others, and really sort of just kind of validate that I could still understand things at a grassroots level, but also, now have the skills and experience to be talking to executives around sort of transformational change. So yeah, Kaplan's been a good run. We've, my role and the team's net new. So over the last couple of years, we've gone from a team of 0. My role itself was completely new to the organization, and then building that out, hiring tech leads, solution architects, data architects to help the organization with various sort of change and modernization initiatives. So yeah, okay. It's been a good journey there.
So you've experienced architecture as a practice and then also architecture within engineering. So you've sort of got both sides of the scale. Interesting debate there. One we could probably touch upon later, but having seen both sides and driven large transformation programs, what do you think makes a great architect in today's world?
I think communication, first and foremost. You've got to be able to communicate effectively on any medium. So that's critical. Obviously, you're there to think logically for problem solving. Again, if you're not doing those things, you're really not being an architect. I think you have to be able to say no. I think that's probably one of the differentiators, perhaps. Although a good developer will do that just as easily. But a willingness to be able to push back on things and say no. There are reasons why you might not want to do that, or even if everyone else in the room agrees with each other, at least make it clear what the options are and the other things that are being included or excluded. And I guess probably if you look at the last sort of 5 years or so, I think it's now more than ever, it's focus. If you look at the number of tools that potentially you've got access to, different messages, etc., the amount of information that can come at you in a day, your ability to really focus on what is the problem I'm trying to solve, I think that's more important than ever.
Absolutely. And that goes for any walk of life, to be honest, isn't it? It is that focus, that discipline and consistency to get stuff delivered or get drive through change and whatnot. Okay, so you've been on, as you said in your introduction, you've moved around a bit. So the great thing about that is giving you access and exposure to a variety of different environments, businesses, industries, consultancy, end client, and so on. So you've got a good breadth of understanding. You've seen many transformation programs be successful, fail. So you're probably a good place to be able to tell us what do you think are the main reasons for transformation programs failing?
Yeah, I think as you say, there's lots of people out there with different experiences, and of course, my experiences, your experiences, your listeners' experiences could all be different. But certainly happy to share what I've seen today. I guess I'd probably split it into three main areas. So firstly, I look at setup. So as obvious as this is, why is that transformation program happening? Is it everyone aligned on what that is, or what part of that they play? I've seen very much, kickoff stage. There's a good energy, there's excitement. We're going to go and do this, but it's not too long thereafter that you can start to lose the thread if you're not clear on what your strategies are to align to your objectives, what your KPIs are that you're trying to move upon. These sorts of things. They're not necessarily got to be there at day one, but they need to be forming up as you're going along. So I think that part of setup's key. Then how you're going to organize yourself around a piece as well. So that's what's your delivery model, what's your governance model, sort of two key areas there. This kind of sets the tone for frequencies of meetings, types of meetings, stakeholder engagement, this side of things. And then also resourcing up internally. So transformation programs, pulling a lot of different people, business side, technical side, potentially supplier as well. And I've seen organizations that really don't ring fence enough space. It might be for some IT teams, but more often I've seen it on the business side, just not understanding what it means through transformation, just how much time you'll need from business SMEs, etc., to bring them on that journey and to get them into workshops and make sure problem space is well understood. So I think that's sort of the main area on a setup. I think then on a sort of underestimation side of things, if I look at it in that space, and kind of overestimation, I think there's a risk when working with suppliers that you overestimate their experience. So, particularly if you've got Big Four or product vendor or otherwise, obviously that organization will come with certain references, certain experiences, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the team that you've got has necessarily got the same level of experiences, etc. So I think, and we can talk about that some more if you want, but I think that can be a key. I think overestimating the commitment within the organization to a transformation program as well. Again, that initial energy is good. Obviously people have worked hard at executive level to get agreement for a program, but how long does that energy stay there once people start to realize, okay, this isn't a 3-month piece of work, it's taking more out of my time, etc. And have you got people on board that really are going to be sort of champions of change? I think previously I've sort of seen organizations kind of overestimate kind of what those different parties will be able to bring to the table. I think that's been a challenge. But I think
there's a lot to unpick there, and I think you're absolutely right in terms of it's got to be exciting enough for senior stakeholders outside of technology to want to buy into it, but not too exciting whereby you're over promising and under delivering. So that's the first bit. But if we can just start with the first part of the answer, which was understanding the why the transformation is being done before starting. How far do you delve into the why?
Yeah, I guess again this will depend on the organization that you're in, but certainly I wouldn't expect to go too far into a why, because really when that program kicks off, there should be a really quite clear messaging around that. So you've got ideally you're looking for your business sponsor to be the explain to the organization why we're doing this. We're driving after efficiency, or we need to stay ahead of the market in a certain thing, or we need to drive more innovation in the organization. So that kind of headline or objective, that should be really clear from the get-go. But where as sort of from an architecture perspective or a change perspective, you want to be coming in and looking at is, okay, how clear are we about the strategy that sits underneath that? So, okay, we know the objective is, bring in innovation, but how are we going to do that? What are the strategies for achieving those objectives, business strategies? And then obviously from there you can start looking at technical strategies. But I think that next layer down about, okay, how do we do this? How are we going after this? What's understood? How much of how much of this is understood? Is it one of these pieces where it's like, we know we want to be more innovative, but we're just not sure how? Okay, that's fine. Or we know we need to be more efficient, and we have 5 main, strategic sort of levers we think we can pull in relation to that.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the second part was trusting your partners and making sure you pick the right partners. Again, or suppliers. How do you discover? So everybody will be experienced enough to be able to select the right partner, right? That's part of their job, or supplier. But how do you discover how much trust to put in them? Because you could over trust them quite early on, and then really quickly or really far down the line realize actually we put too much trust in them and too much reliability on them, and we're now we're too far behind, or we're falling behind. So what tests or what, I suppose, triggers have you put in place with your teams to be able to say, right, after 30 days, what does this look like? Do you see what? And I'm not talking about necessarily KPIs, but more around that feeling, that trust piece.
So I think it's interesting you sort of say everyone can pick the right supplier. I guess I'd even start with that. So depending on the organization you're in, you might be in a position where you've got an established set of suppliers. You have a certain procurement list of suppliers that you work with, and that's it's a defined space. In my experience, where I've come in and set teams up, etc., that wider level of maturity or constraint doesn't exist in those organizations. So then you start looking at, well, okay, what sort of organizations do I want to work with? So, for example, you might be drawn to, some of the big names because they're big names. Your executive team would have heard of, Insult consultancy name here. But if you're on a transformation project that's perhaps a few £1 million, big players are just not going to be interested in that. They're not going to commit. They might give you a team if the bench is quite busy, but that's not going to be like a key project for them. And if you go the other way, you potentially engage with a consultancy that's really trying too hard. Perhaps they've only got like a 5 or 6 person team in total, and you're there, taking everything they've got and needing more. So I think that initial selection of right sizing the sorts of consultancy you want, yes, RFI, RFPs are part of that process. Sales decks, trying to get an understanding of the team you've got. So I think there's those elements to be starting out with. My preference, if you're able to, is when you're engaged in the kind of pre-sales cycle, hopefully you're starting to meet some of the team members, ideally outside of just pure sales conversations. So potentially you've met with their lead architect or one of their architects team, just trying to get a sense of, okay, how do they see us? Do they do they see us as a key client for them? Are they talking about large team, small team? Have they been there very long? Do they have, depending on which way you want to look at it, do they have experience in the product you're interested in, and how far back does that go? Does the organization itself have experience in your industry, and how far back does that go? So those sorts of things definitely come into play. And then, as you say, once you're actually up and running, so you've signed the paperwork, you've onboarded the team, I think for me it's just trying to get in a sense of some cadence around things. So whilst I've looked at sort of setting up design authorities, such that you're trying to get designs reviewed, etc., that can be, in the truest sense, it can come quite late. So you've already up and done quite a lot of analysis, depending on, if you're waterfall, agile, or some kind of iterative delivery mechanism. So what can you start to do to start just getting some people to play back their thinking? Half-hour informal session. What have you learned this week? Is there anything I can help you with? Because ultimately, obviously, that everyone's there, hopefully, to get the right outcome for both sides. So, are your supplier architects or otherwise getting the answers they need from the organization? And if they're not, then how can you help them? How do you help your stakeholders? Potentially our workshops working the way that you want, the way they want. Just really trying to just get a bit of a sense of the feeling on both sides of the fence as to whether that works, at the earliest.
I was going to say, and that's probably the most important bit, because you don't want them to be silent about it. You want to give them the encouragement to, as the sponsor on your side of the business, to be able to say, look, whatever you're not getting, come to me and I'll make sure you get it, kind of thing. Because if you don't get it, then that puts us back, and so on and so forth. So it's, you're right. It's you trusting them, but also giving them enough jurisdiction to be able to come to you when things are falling behind and giving them that accountability as well at the same time, I suppose. Okay, makes
Yeah,
absolute sense.
I think the other thing though that you do is in a more in a more senior position. Unfortunately, or the nature of what your organization is paying you to do is to be a gatekeeper there. So if you're having those meetings and you've got people in front of you that have got job titles of senior architect or enterprise architect, or all the other consultancy names that you can get, does that person really, would you hire that person with that job title?
Yeah.
Do you think they are good enough? Because it can be, I like you as an individual, you seem like a really good person, but are you able to do what this organization needs you to do? And if not, then you need to start having those conversations at account management
It does.
to start saying, do you need some more support around this? Is there is there an upskilling thing going on here? Or worst case, it becomes unfortunately, this person you've obviously given them a chance to step up, which is great for you, but it's not working for us. And we need to look at some alternatives here. So,
and are there any sort of tests or almost like mini assessments that you might do to make that decision or to have that conversation? Early doors, obviously.
Yeah,
and I know it's different, it's specific to the program and so on and so forth, but in general, how do you know who's a good architect at the right level?
Yeah, fair play. I guess there's an element of having sort of sat in that chair and so forth. I can look at that and think, well, I know what I would know by this point in time, or likewise, might have one or two of my team members in the call with me as well to give certain perspectives there, and just be looking and think, okay, given how long this has been going for, what strength of answer do you want? End of the first couple of weeks. Ideally, you want them to remember what company they're working at. Noticing what's the objective we're trying to go after. But in that amount of those early days, everyone's in workshops, their head's full of loads of information. But particularly with an architect, you want to start seeing something getting distilled. So okay, there's no documentation or whatever yet, but there should be the starting of a model, something that begins to say, oh, right, I understand the general flow of your business looks like this. That's going to generally mean, this is the sort of things that I'm thinking about. These workshops are of more interest. Oh, I've got some questions about this. Sure about the scope of this or the implications of that, or I've got some concerns about this or that. So that those sorts of questions I'd be expecting to see, depending on the level and the pace you're working at. 4 to 6 weeks in, I want those architects to be asking me questions and updates as well, and playing that sort of thing back.
Okay, cool. As we've already said, you've moved around a lot, so you've been exposed to various environments and so on. Great person to really talk about what the first 100 days look like in a new role, whether that's chief architect, head of architecture, whatever the role, but in a senior role. So, you join Aviva. How did you approach your first 100 days with Aviva, who, it's well known, they have an established architecture function or practices and so on. So what did your first 100 days look like there?
Yeah, just because it's a nice example. So as you say, Aviva, well-established architecture practice. So just for listeners' benefit, you're looking at a solution architecture function at that point in time that was over a head count of over 100, and I think the A capacity was sort of within the 10 to 20. I think. Within that, then obviously you don't have one person managing 100 architects. That would be madness. So you're looking to separate that out across at that point in time, different lines of business. I joined the health line of business, and at that point, I think I had about 6 architects and moved that up to about 9 with sort of supplier and contract resource. So, as you say, coming in somewhere like that has a very established sort of framework. Whether that's job profiles, it's got a governance framework. It has an organisation, perhaps most importantly, that recognises why your architecture team is there. So going to other organisations, it can be a little bit of a, okay, what is an architect, etc., etc. Whereas, an organisation like Aviva will be looking at saying, okay, if I'm going to kick off a project, I want project managers, I want BAs, maybe I want Scrum, I need an architect on this. I recognise that there are various governance boards, whether that's delivery boards or architecture boards, that I need to go through. So that framework is already there. So that's one of those things you kind of, okay, I don't have to work so hard on the framework side, or to some degree, personal brand is still very, very important. But the role, explain to people what an architect is, why you're there. That's one of the things you don't have to worry about. So that's good. Where you can be, and again, experience I suppose, differ here. Where you can get different experiences is, okay, how do I see this role, and where do I see my boundaries, and how do I expect to work with other functions? So,
Yep.
if you work project managers, BAs, or whatever, what do I see those role boundaries? Now, if you're coming in somewhere that there was someone before you, everyone's kind of got their view of what your
Yeah.
boundary is. The shape you think, you're a triangle or whatever. If you come in and you're a square, whatever, then what does that do? You're going to get an element of friction on that. So certainly coming somewhere like Aviva, it was a case of trying to understand, okay, how does this work generally? Am I happy with how it works? Do I think I can work in that space? What problems are being seen? And then as you start to work through some of those problems, you begin to recognize, well, actually certain criticisms of the team are actually a result of wider, the way we do certain changes. And it's actually, once you've been in there as a leader, you can start to work with other leaders to say, we need to change our ways of working around some of these things. That will help my team and your team do better work, and will solve some of these problems.
Okay. And how is that different to Red Cross, where there was a as you, in your words, sort of distinct lack of architecture? So how's that different, and what challenges did you face because of that then?
Yeah, I guess I suppose I need to be mindful of how I've described that. So what I've found that the Red Cross is much more what I'd have called, well, there's two things. One, I joined in COVID, and that was the organisation itself was trying to, I suppose, as all organisations were, was trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this? But particularly with the Red Cross providing volunteers, you're probably aware, if you were going to hospital and stuff to get injections, you're seeing volunteers out in car parks and so forth. So the Red Cross wasn't just impacted by COVID like any organisation was. It was trying to organise to help respond to COVID. So that was already a very sort of interesting dynamic, and very much a drive to, okay, we need to continue to operate. We can't be doing what some organisations did to say, okay, now that we can't trade very much, we can focus on change. This was kind of the opposite side of it. So what I found at Red Cross, certainly there was an architecture function there, but it was, to me, not, I suppose the language I tend to use is old school, in the sense of it being much more, I would call it third line. So very much, the purpose of it is governance, to run an architecture review board, and kind of to, past judgment's a little bit harsh, but certainly some of the feedback I got when I originally arrived certainly felt that some people attending the architecture review board did feel it, it was judgment being passed, and that's to me is not what architecture is. So really for me, it was about trying to move architecture from third line to first line, so that you're actually getting out there and trying to help people up front. You don't want anyone to spend a lot of time on a project, design, whatever, bring to an architecture review board, and you to say, well, no, you've gone left at the first turn instead of right. You've wasted a lot of time here, right? You want to be out, you want to be meeting people, you want to be understanding the problems they've got. So that for me was really the starting of that journey, to try and encourage the team and restructure the team to be able to make them much more engaging with the business, engaging with wider teams, rather than being kind of the classic rubber stamp checkbox at the end of a project life cycle, which is not what architecture is for me.
Okay, fine. Okay. And then kind of like a similar story at Kaplan, whereby they had architecture as an ideology structured, but there wasn't necessarily a practice. So your job was to build that architecture discipline from scratch, wasn't there? So in that scenario, what were your priorities in those first sort of 100 days?
Yeah, so I think if you take as say the Kaplan sort of head of architecture and engineering role was completely new. So this is one not where there was someone before me. Likewise, the whilst we had engineers there, there was no sort of technical leadership. There was no permanent architects there. So it was a case in that scenario of initially meeting with the CIO to understand. Well, effectively, obviously, you've advertised the job. What do you want? What do you want? What problems do you see? And so that was, initially the brief was really, okay, why am I here? Why did you create this role? Conversations with the CIO. And from there, it was a case of, okay, all right, I can see that you recognise, and parts of the organisation recognise, there is a need for more architecture around this. There is also a need for more governance of some of our engineering partners. Okay, I can start to go after that. The first 100 days, I guess specifically, was around, okay, what for me was, do I want to focus more on the engineering side or on the architecture side? Because if you're across both of those things, they have quite different focus areas. So and coming in with no team. It's like, okay, I need to be able to prioritize on this. So quite an early assessment to answer your question within the first 100 days was, okay, which of these is the problem? And for me, it was a case of broadly engineering was looking pretty good. Had one underperforming supplier that I would need action, but not immediately. Whereas architecture was looking very weak. It looked like we got a few projects that needed more guidance than they'd had, and they'd run into some difficulty. So that sort of set about a series of hires where I began to kind of hire people to plug the high risk areas. So if you were looking at initial hires, contract solution architect, another couple of senior solution architects to come in thereafter, and you begin to kind of look at the things that are kind of big and scary or a bit on fire, and just kind of man them up those a bit. Moving from there, then hiring in tech leads to be able to provide more oversight to engineering functions that then allow me to be into more deep, take a more detailed assessment of the underperforming sort of engineering partner, or to make plans for how I might go about, improving, or as it turned out, actually replacing them. So, that first 100 days was very much around, okay, I know I've got a headcount. I was lucky enough not to have to argue for headcount, but so it was in budget, whereas they were empty seats. So that was a good place to be able to move quite quickly, to go from a team of 0 to a team of 9. I think it's 15 months in the end. Was great, and they're a great team there.
Okay. So now, more generally speaking, what targets do you set yourself typically, personally, for your first 100 days?
Yeah, it's so the different things in there. What you want from your team, what you want from yourself. So I guess, if I look at probably the first 3 months, really, it's very much around feedback. You're not really going to see anything metric wise or whatever that's going to move within 3 months. It's going to be qualitative rather than quantitative. So you're starting to get a sense of, firstly, is the CIO happy with what you're saying as the person that brought you into the organization? But obviously they're going to be a level removed from day to day. But if you're starting to deal with key sort of business owners, business sponsors on certain initiatives, do they begin to understand why you're there? As we sort of touched upon, this is the new role, so potentially there's been no one putting time in their diary to talk to you about certain things. So do they begin to understand, actually, this person is helping me? They're starting to make some sense of things. They've asked me some good questions. They've come back with some good answers. So for me, first sort of 90 days, certainly, it's very much around that feedback. If you're in a position of, you've come into somewhere and you've got a team, then you want to be finger on the pulse there. Does your team feel happier now that you're there, or have you got concerns? And then also out to your peer network. Typically, depends on the structure of your organization, whether it's kind of delivery, infosec, infrastructure, the other kind of potentially heads of whichever director levels individuals you'll be dealing with. How is that going? Are you starting to get a kind of a good rapport between yourselves? So very much those just kind of, how does it feel is the first 90 days.
And it's really hard to define that, isn't it, or put a metric or anything on that. Do you have any that you sort of look out for, or is it generally just that it feels quite good or not?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I struggle with this. I think I put something on LinkedIn a few years back, 15,000 odd views, which at the time was, well, for me anyway, personally, was a fair response. But it basically I was lucky enough to get attention from a couple of architects from Vodafone, IBM, and a few other things, to all kind of be the same kind of, okay, this is a hard question for architecture, particularly early doors. If you can look at things over a long enough period of time, you can begin to say, okay, strategically, I've moved this, which is what you'd expect for architecture. So, as an example, I could say, with one of sort of recent clients, as it were, my team and I made a recommendation to exit a big four, consultancy, and that was a sort of cost avoidance of over £10 million. Now that's but you don't do that. Doesn't land every week, right? That's
no, of course not.
But it's very much quantitative. Whereas other elements I've tried to do, now I've been Kaplan a few years, is you can start looking at certain elements around defect rates or around some of the kind of Scrum-based kind of KPIs for delivery, and sort of say, okay, have we helped kind of avoid anything too severe in a spike? So obviously a Scrum team will run largely without an architect involved, that completely. However, if you are starting to complement the two, your architect should be looking a little bit further down the line to begin to say, okay, you've got these kind of things on your roadmap. is there anything architecturally that concerns me? Not an engineering level, but potentially you're going to say my product's going to start to need more from an integration layer, or going to need to more in terms of infrastructure or something like this. So as an architect, if I can help that, then there could be a little bit less variance within their numbers.
When they get to that point, it's like, right, okay, well, this is sort of box off. And everybody always says a good architect should always live in the future, shouldn't they? Or at least have a crystal ball to be able to look into the future.
Absolutely. That's it. Just trying to spot some of those icebergs for the team. Obviously, they need to do spikes. You're looking at slightly different problems, but I think you can help in that space. Otherwise, though, I'll be honest with you, it's been qualitative. Really, it's a case of business owners, business executives saying, yes, this team helps. And sometimes it can be as simple as helps. Which can be challenging when you come around to funding cycles, etc. Your team's helpful. But show me the numbers. But yeah, it's certainly for me.
It's difficult.
It's a continual challenge. Would be interesting, perhaps on one of your other podcasts, to see if someone can come in with a bomb-proof answer to that question.
A framework. The irony. So let's go beyond the 100 days. So you've done your 100 days, you've done the assessment, and so on and so forth. How do you use historic data and infographics to inform the future strategy within your new role?
So I think that has been a challenge. Certainly on the data, historic data has been a challenge for me for, I would say, a number of years. I think there's a mixture of, on the one hand, I guess coming into organizations that don't have an architecture team, or that are trying to reboot that, potentially talks to what the rest of their IT capabilities might look like. So for example, you might say, okay, well, if you haven't got an architecture team and you've got a certain scale of organization, potentially perhaps your cloud architecture isn't as up to date as it could be, or maybe your understanding of data architecture isn't as up to date as it could be. And if those things are gaps in your now, then historically it's very difficult for you to say, well, okay, get me some relevant data from a couple of years ago. And it's kind of like, well, the reason we've got this data transformation project is because we can't answer questions like that. So there's elements of that. I think certainly talking to business owners around, I don't know if this is necessarily what you mean, around their experiences of what they've tried before, what's been challenging before, that element of kind of qualitative statement rather than quantitative. I think in terms of where it's started to stray into some of those spaces, whether you're looking at kind of volunteer numbers or order numbers, etc., you do start stepping into very much that is business territory. And making statements around that can be challenging, or can cause a certain pushback. If you were to make a statement around maybe sales volumes over the last 3 or 4 years, for example, right, that's going to be dependent on a whole bunch of factors that you as an architect, particularly a new one in the organization, are going to be unaware of, right? So if you're going to start using business data too much, you really want to make sure that, okay, the primary stakeholder for owning that data set, let's go and talk to them and understand what that data actually means. So I guess that's on the one side for using data, and I suppose cautions of using that. I think other than infographics, I guess I still like, if I'm looking for a useful diagram or something to help people, I still really like a use case diagram. I know they're not cool or anything, but I just find that getting the kind of the scope of a piece of work on a singular piece of paper, albeit it might be A3, but A4, or at least a screen, and being able to talk to people about it, both technical and non-technical, is really powerful. And I think the use case piece is just a nice way of, you can put a certain level of abstraction in it, but mostly it's around kind of identifying all the different actors in things, because it's very easy, even in just a moderately complex organization, to forget about things. What's the operational team that does this report, and what's the administrator that does this, and we've got an audit role here, or a SOX role here, and then how do you do this, or if this fails, then who's like dead letter queue is it going to? Not necessarily like as an engineering perspective, but as a like customer inquiry perspective or whatever. So I find use case diagrams to be really good for that. I find capability diagrams with RAG on it always good. Again, picture on a page, nice and clear, whether they're technical capabilities or business capabilities, even sort of systems aggregations, just red, amber, green, because this can be good. So, okay, do we agree these are the problems we're trying to solve? So I think if you can get a mixed audience to agree something on a singular piece of paper, it's much easier then to take off different sort of threads in different pieces of work, and always kind of coming back to a manageable piece of scope and understanding. So you can go, do we all agree this? Yes. Do we all agree this? Yes. And if you can hold that train all the way down, you've got a good chance of succeeding.
So without sort of oversimplifying it, you will look at some data post sort of 100 days, or even within those first 100 days, then go and speak to the key stakeholder within that area of business, so whether that's sales, customer service, marketing, whatever it may be. So you've got your quantitative, whether that's accurate or not. You're then verifying it with, the qualitative narrative around it. And then you go away, put a visual together, whether that's a user case diagram, whether that's a RAG or whatever it is, get everybody together. Right, this is where we're at. This is the history behind it. This is what we're going to try and do. Are we all on the same page? And then just continually track that, right? So that's how you're aligning the business to the technology, or the business to the program of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of the last, I suppose, part of that is that sort of presentation of data, as you said. So the one is the kind of what data can I get access to? Then there's some certain infographics around things, and then there's I guess I tend to operate with a kind of key data items, key metric slide. So there's just the key facts about the organization, that might be a key fact about where we're trying to get to, but more often than not, it's key facts about the organization itself. How many staff do we have? How many customers do we have? How many different regions do we operate in? Maybe how many different compliance frameworks do we have to work with? If you just start building that into even just a singular slide, you begin, it's a really useful source, particularly as you get larger projects. You get churn as well. There can be really key things that you discover in an early workshop that you're like, wow, our business is 99% intermediated, which is like massively significant. But internally as an organization, everyone knows that, so no one mentions it because everyone knows it. But if you've got a supplier partner in, they don't know that.
So, exactly.
Those key facts, particularly if you're coming in new, it gives you a fresh pair of eyes, and it's like, oh, that is useful. No, that is useful. No. So trying to gather those together, yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose one key thing which we've probably sort of overlooked is how short that presentation is, because architects historically have got this persona of 50 page slide deck, and it's boring, and it's it's drawings and stuff like that, shapes and stuff, and that's the persona they have. Whereas if you can get that on one or two slides, it's short, sharp, it's concise. People know exactly where they are, especially with the business side, who probably don't have the attention to detail that an architect will have. So that's part of the translation piece, right? We've got all the detail. We'll keep that for us and our team, but we really need to simplify this to keep everybody engaged. That isn't us.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I've got in the habit of doing is I generally work with a slide deck. So I like PowerPoint. Generally, if you've got one that's in a corporate template, even though that's your own scratch pad, just work in that. Because at some point you'll want to basically take slides out of your kind of master slide deck and use it for something. So as you say, there is a tendency to host a 50 or 60 slide deck, and depends on the organization. Sometimes you need a 50 or 60 slide deck. But you need then to be able to segment that and say, okay, if I'm going to do 50 or 60 slides, am I presenting this? Like, is that really? Probably not. Am I giving this to someone as a document to read? In which case, how do you structure that? So that's when something like an executive summary on the first slide needs to be bang. And depending on who you're dealing with, the could be any executive is either going to look at that, read the line and go, that's fine for me, or they're going to say, want to know why. Exactly. Why is that? And that's when obviously you're getting into appendix or follow-up meetings or whatever else. But absolutely tailoring the information for your audience is that key part of communication skills I was saying at the start. So important for an architect to be able to say, okay, what's the audience for this? What's the outcome for this? And that's I still get caught out by that. I still get caught with you said this and this. That's quite a big statement. Where's the follow-up to it? I thought, okay, I thought you didn't want to see that in this meeting. Okay, you do, fine. I can bring that up because I've got that information available to me. But very much work on a deck. So you've always got, you've got your questions, you've got ideas, you've got key pieces of information, and then you can start sort of copy and pasting out of that, or whichever, taking snapshots out of that to use for different stakeholder groups. But if you're working like that, it just avoids the whole kind of movement between kind of one note or multiple different things, or just giving these very, very large slide decks to the wrong audience.
Okay, cool. No, thank you for that. So, going to move on to our quick fire questions now. Then, first one: what do you expect in 2025 would be the game changer from a technology perspective? If you've got any other answer than AI,
I'll be specific then. Yeah, obviously, right. So you can do like AI agents, blah blah. For me, the thing that I've seen recently and that I like the potential of, like, scary on both sides, is the voice AI. So depending on what you've heard lately, the latency on this is getting pretty low now with your conversation with ChatGPT or whichever. But that latency now is really quite low. So the ability to be able to converse with something, I think, does change it. I think the technology, obviously, the technology or the commodity, the SaaS offerings that are out there, starting to see in this year, you're going to see much more of those next year. And I think they're going to be nicely tailored for different industries and so forth. So to actually see those things finally come to life, because we've kind of been talking about and looking at generative AI, whatever it is, for a couple of years, the kind of idea of FAQs, knowledge bases and so forth. But I think to really make that more powerful, more accessible, is to put it with voice. So just as an example of this, if you take someone like my father's hard of hearing and can also struggle with foreign accents. So depending on organizations, help desks he's trying to work with, that can be quite difficult for both sides of that conversation. If you put that in an AI, when you're able to say, can you slow down? Can you repeat it? Can you repeat it again? Can you explain it a different way? That's really helpful for someone, that's got some level of disability. So I see that on the positive side as potentially really powerful for, things like NHS and so forth. But also it concerns me that how quickly you can emulate something now, if you took something like this, for example, obviously both of us, you could put us in a HeyGen or whatever, and someone's got a fake video of both you and I. So, when you think about, parents and so forth, and how much fraudsters will go after these, the introduction of very accessible voice AI is also a concern. And I'm really interested to see how organizations look to protect people from fraud in that space. But I think both sides of that will become very accessible in 25.
Okay. What advice would you give to a newly appointed chief architect? And when I say chief, I mean sort of number one architect. And I know we've gone into a lot of detail, but just sort of high level.
Yeah, I think that the specific on the role is know why you're there. It is. Did the role already exist? In which case, was everyone happy with your predecessor, and it's kind of like keep doing what they're doing, but do it a little bit better? Or did the role not exist? And if it didn't exist, then why are you there? Now, you're going to ask that in an interview anyway, right?
Yeah,
that's true. But like with all these things, we all have a face on both sides of the table that we put on the interview, right? So you want to be, within those first 3 months, you want to be getting under it. Why am I really here? What's my chances of success?
Yeah. Okay. Any advice you wish you'd received earlier on in your career?
Yeah, I would say the key thing for me was, we talk about people, process, and technology, but typically that's described within a project or a solution space. Whereas for me, what I was blind to for quite a long time was the people element outside of the project. So really the stakeholder part. So by that, what I mean is, you might come up with a solution. You think this is the right solution. This is the best solution. Why would you not agree with that? Why would you not sign that off? Right? I've immediately kind of looked at it as, there's a design thing over here. This design is great. Why would you not sign this off as this particular stakeholder? And then that's just naive, quite frankly. So, as you kind of move through this a little bit, you start getting into the reality of, part of a successful solution is it has to get to production, right? If I've got a great design that I cannot get signed off, or I cannot get approved, or I cannot get delivered because we don't know if the skills, means, or otherwise, it's not the right solution. So sometimes, an average solution, or even to some degree, a poor solution that improves on where you are, but actually makes its way to production, is more valuable than the perfect solution that just stays as slideware.
Okay. I like that. Okay. Now, from a talent perspective, specifically within architecture, what's the biggest change you expect to see in the market over the next 5 years?
I think one of the things that I look at, and although I moved around a bit, it's so hard to get a measure of it. Probably you're in a better position than me, or potentially some of your listeners would have views on this. I guess I have a level of concern about bringing talent into the architecture space. So you've got a mixture of some of the there's no such thing as architecture. It's all engineering sort of narrative that you can get on LinkedIn. How prevalent that is, I don't know. You've then got we continue to work not just with offshore companies that are really some of those more junior roles where you'd be looking to get your team experience with that are going to external consultancies. We've also got much more digital nomads as well, where potentially you can be working with me and I'm sitting on a beach in Bali or something, at quite a competitive rate, rather than hiring a couple of say more junior people in your London office. So I do worry about the bringing people in, and I think with AI sort of being able to answer more and more questions, some of the things that you might have otherwise given a graduate or a junior member of your staff, say, go and research this, go and give me pros and cons on this and this. It's like, well, you can come back an hour later with your generated answer and have something reasonably solid there. So I do worry about the talent in the country, how you develop those, how you bring people on. I don't know who these days still runs graduate programs. That for me over the next 5 years, I'm really curious to see what we do with the talent pool in this country.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because that's the bottom end of the pyramid, which from a numbers game feeds into the mid level, which we're already at a sort of slight in architecture slightly behind a mid level. So you add that lack of grads or lack of juniors coming through. You're right, the next 5 years could be quite interesting indeed. Brilliant. Well, look, sadly, James, we've run out of time. So thank you so much for your time, for brilliant topic, brilliant podcast episode. So it's been really interesting to chat in detail about why you believe, amongst other things, but why you believe transformation programs fail. So thank you once again for an excellent episode and giving us your time today.
Thanks, Mario. Great questions. Appreciate your time.
And that's a wrap. Sadly, we're at the end of another Transformational Blueprints episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it and there were plenty of golden nuggets for you to take away. If you're a fan of the show, please do remember to share, like, and leave reviews so that more people from our industry get to hear and benefit from these too. Please also follow Synaxia Group on LinkedIn to keep up to date with new episodes. Links in the show notes. Join us next time for another episode packed with tips and advice from senior leaders in the technology world.